If you want to trace the origins of modern humanity's obsession with unidentified flying objects, almost every clue leads back to one bright summer afternoon in 1947. That day, the skies over Washington state looked calm and peaceful, but a pilot named Kenneth Arnold, flying his small private plane over the rugged Cascade Mountains, suddenly witnessed something that defied all logic. He saw 9 strange objects flashing with a metallic gleam, darting across the mountain peaks at incredible speed. Later, when Arnold described what he saw to reporters, he said the objects flew like saucers skipping across water. That single comparison accidentally gave birth to a brand new phrase, flying saucer. This wasn't a scene from a sci-fi novel, nor a rumor whispered on street corners. It was the first widely publicized and officially documented UFO sighting in modern history. It shattered people's ordinary understanding of the sky and brought the idea that something unknown might exist beyond Earth out of the realm of mysticism and straight onto the front pages of newspapers. So what secrets were hidden behind this mysterious sighting? Let's start from the very beginning. It was around 2 p.m. on June 24th, 1947. Kenneth Arnold was on a flight from Chehalis to Yakima, delivering a shipment of medical supplies. Before takeoff, the Weather Service had reported perfect flying conditions. Visibility over 10 kilometers, the sky as clear as polished glass, and not a single cumulus cloud in sight. It was, by all accounts, a flawless day for flying. Arnold's instruments showed a steady cruising altitude of 3,000 meters, his usual height, a level he had flown countless times in his 15 years as a private pilot over the Pacific Northwest. As he approached Mount Rainier, the state's most iconic peak towering at 4,392 meters, he expected to see the usual glare from its glaciers reflecting the sunlight. Normally, he would instinctively look away to avoid the blinding flash, but this time, the reflection was different. It wasn't steady. It flickered as if someone in the distance was flashing a mirror toward him. At first, Arnold assumed it was sunlight glinting off another aircraft's wings. He rubbed his eyes, checked his radar screen, but there was only one blip, his own plane. Nothing else was registered within 50 kilometers. He wondered if it might be a secret military test flight. After all, in 1947, World War II had just ended, and the military frequently conducted experiments in that area. But when Arnold looked up again, his heart nearly skipped a beat. In the air, roughly 20 kilometers northwest of Mount Rainier, there were 9 objects moving in a way no aircraft should. They weren't planes, no wings, no tail fins, no propellers. Each one looked like a flattened disc, about 50 feet long by Arnold's estimation, flying in a loose V formation, spaced roughly 1 kilometer apart. Arnold gripped the control stick tightly, eyes locked on the strange formation. The objects glided smoothly, yet their motion wasn't like any normal flight path. It was erratic, skipping forward in short bursts like a stone skimming across water. They occasionally dipped and rose, but always continued in the same direction. Fast, silent, and impossibly stable. To make sure it wasn't just an illusion, Arnold glanced down at the clock on his dashboard. The time read 2:29 p.m. Then he started calculating the speed of those flying objects in his head. He used the distance between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams as a reference, about 47 kilometers. He watched the clock closely and realized that those 9 flying objects covered that distance in just 1 minute and 42 seconds. 1 minute and 42 seconds. For 47 kilometers. That number exploded in Arnold's mind. He quickly scribbled the figures into his flight log. 47 kilometers divided by 1.7 minutes, converted into hours. The result was staggering, roughly 1,600 kilometers per hour. But in 1947, human technology simply wasn't capable of that kind of speed. At the time, the U.S. military's most advanced jet, the P-80 Shooting Star, could only reach a top speed of about 932 kilometers per hour. Even the secret rocket-powered planes being tested couldn't go that fast, let alone keep 9 crafts flying in formation at that speed. What was even stranger was that these 9 objects left no visible trails behind them. No smoke from propellers, no condensation trails like those from jet engines. Nothing. They seemed to appear out of thin air and then glide effortlessly forward. About 45 seconds later, The 9 objects streaked past the peak of Mount Adams and vanished into the distant clouds. Arnold sat frozen in the cockpit, palms drenched in sweat. He had been flying for 15 years. He'd seen ball lightning inside thunderclouds, mirages that shimmered over the horizon, and even wreckage from failed military test flights. But he had never seen anything like this before. At that moment, one thought echoed in his mind. These aren't human. By 3:25 that afternoon, Arnold's plane landed safely at Yakima Airport. But instead of making his usual delivery call, he jumped straight out of the cockpit and sprinted into the control tower. Grabbing the arm of the duty officer, he blurted out, his voice trembling, "I just saw 9 mysterious flying objects moving faster than anything I've ever seen, right above Mount Rainier." The controller thought Arnold had just hit some bad turbulence and was still shaken up. Smiling, he handed Arnold a glass of water and asked kindly, "You sure you're not just overtired, Mr. Arnold? There weren't any other planes in that airspace today." Arnold slammed his flight log down on the table, his voice sharp with frustration. "I'm not hallucinating," he said. "I calculated the speed of those crafts. It was 1,600 kilometers per hour, and they made no sound. No vapor trails at all." The controller's smile slowly faded. He knew Arnold well. This wasn't some daydreaming pilot making up wild stories. Arnold had been an Air Force pilot during World War II. After retiring, he became a private pilot transporting cargo. He was known for being meticulous. He checked his tire pressure 3 times before every flight. Even the rookies in the control tower knew one thing for sure. Arnold's word was more reliable than radar. That same evening, a reporter from the Yakima Herald caught wind of the story and came to interview Arnold. During the interview, Arnold repeatedly emphasized that the strange objects moved like discs skipping across the surface of water. The next morning, the headline on the Yakima Herald read, "Pilot spots flying saucers over Mount Rainier." When Arnold saw the article, he was furious. He kept insisting that he'd never said those objects were flying saucers, only that they moved like saucers. But his clarification came too late. The phrase flying saucer had already taken off, literally. It spread across the United States overnight, carried by every newspaper and radio station. Within just 2 weeks, reports of flying saucers poured in from 37 of the 48 states, totaling more than 1,200 sightings. The post office was flooded with thousands of letters every day. Police departments were overwhelmed with calls, their operators repeating the same line dozens of times a day. "We are investigating. Please remain calm." Even the White House received inquiries from members of Congress, demanding to know whether the government was aware of the origin of these mysterious saucers. At that time, America had just emerged from the shadows of World War II, only to be thrown immediately into the anxieties of the Cold War. Fear of secret weapons ran deep in people's bones. So when the public heard about these incredibly advanced flying objects, suspicion spread like wildfire. Had the Soviets already developed ultra-high-speed aircraft? And once that thought took hold, there was no stopping it. Finally, just 3 days after the Arnold sighting, the U.S. Army Air Forces established a secret investigation team under the code name Project Sign. Investigators immediately located Arnold and subjected him to an intense 8-hour interrogation. Arnold later recalled that the investigators took the matter of the flying saucers very seriously. It didn't feel like they were doubting him. It felt like they were confirming details. They asked him to draw the exact shape of the objects he'd seen that day, to trace their flight path, and even had him sit inside a mock cockpit to recreate his viewing angle. The investigators questioned him about every possible detail, whether he'd seen windows on the objects, heard any sound, or smelled anything unusual. They even asked what prescription his glasses were at the time. After hours of detailed questioning, the investigation team never released their findings to the public. It wasn't until a month later that the Army Air Forces issued a short statement claiming that Mr. Arnold may have seen a weather balloon, or that he'd simply witnessed an optical illusion caused by thunderclouds. But that explanation, even a school kid wouldn't buy it. First, a weather balloon can only travel at a few dozen kilometers per hour, while Arnold's objects were moving 20 times faster. Second, weather balloons are round. They don't fly in a V formation. And most importantly, Reporters later discovered that the U.S. Weather Bureau's records for June 24th clearly stated no balloon launch planned in the Cascade Mountain region. In other words, on that day in Washington state, no weather balloons were released at all. Then came something even stranger, the FBI files. In 2015, the U.S. government declassified a batch of FBI documents from 1947. Among them was a file labeled 62-117445, which recorded the Seattle field office's investigation into the Arnold sighting. According to the file, Arnold's testimony was deemed highly credible. He showed no signs of mental instability, nor any motive to fabricate such a story. The document also noted that 3 observation stations near Mount Rainier had detected unidentified signals at the same time Arnold made his sighting, signals that could not be traced or identified. What's even more thought-provoking is what one of the Army Air Force's officers involved in the investigation revealed years later, after his retirement. In an interview, he said, "We knew back then it wasn't a weather balloon, and it wasn't any aircraft we knew of. But we had orders from above. We couldn't tell the truth, because we didn't know what it was, and if we told the public, it would cause panic. And the reason they were so afraid of causing panic had as much to do with the Cold War as it did with timing. Because just 10 days after the Arnold incident, something else happened in Roswell, New Mexico. The now infamous Roswell UFO crash. A local rancher there discovered strange metallic debris scattered across his land. The Air Force initially told the press it was the wreckage of a flying saucer. But the very next day, they changed their story, saying it was only a weather balloon. 2 incidents, only 10 days apart, both in the American West, and both with the exact same official explanation: weather balloons. It was hard not to see it as what it really looked like: a pre-planned cover story. Kenneth Arnold, the man at the center of this flying saucer sighting, never imagined that one accidental encounter would completely change the course of his life. After the incident made headlines, he became one of the most famous people in America. Reporters camped outside his house day and night. Film studios offered to make documentaries about him. Even beer companies reached out, wanting him to endorse a new brand called Flying Saucer Beer. But Arnold turned down every commercial offer. He didn't care about fame or money. He just wanted someone to tell him what it was he'd really seen that day. Unfortunately, the truth never came. What did come were endless troubles. Not long after the event, Arnold began receiving anonymous phone calls. The voices on the other end were cold and emotionless, warning him to stop talking about what he saw, or he would regret it. Then strange things started happening to his plane. Sometimes it would pass every safety check before takeoff, but once in the air, the engine would suddenly cut out. Other times, the navigation system would go haywire, leading him into completely unfamiliar airspace. But what truly terrified him was the feeling of being watched. No matter which airport he landed at, there was always a man in a black suit standing in the distance, staring at him. And every time Arnold tried to approach, the man would quietly turn and walk away. Arnold later confided to a friend, saying, "I feel like I've become invisible. Like every move I make is being watched by someone else." His family wasn't spared either. His daughter was mocked at school. Her classmates called her father a liar, saying he never saw a flying saucer at all. His wife, under constant anxiety, developed a nervous condition. Every night she would check the doors and windows over and over before she could fall asleep. Eventually, to escape the nightmare that his life had become, Arnold sold his plane in 1950 and moved to a small town in Alaska. From that day on, he never spoke about the flying saucers again. But shortly before his death in 1984, Arnold wrote a letter to a close friend. In it, he said, "I have never told a lie in my entire life. What I saw on June 24, 1947, was the most real thing I've ever witnessed. I went to my grave never knowing what it was. But I believe someday humanity will find the answer."